Yeah. Yeah, all right, a good slow clap, man. That has to be a part of the tradition that we're starting today. Definitely, definitely. Sure. Thank you very much. First I wanted to welcome you all to the first ever SF Support Meetup. I'm extremely excited to be here tonight and to talk with everybody and see some great presentations about being a support engineer, being in the support space, and actually, working with customers and making our customers awesome. I think we all, the goal of this group is that we really want to bring a community together of people who really like working with customers, who have that technical, aspect of their role as well, and finding that balance between both those roles, because I think it's really challenging for a lot of us. My name is Dylan. I'm the regional support manager for Atlassian based out of San Francisco. I've been with Atlassian for about 2 years, and I'm pretty stoked to be working with an awesome group of people. Many of them are here. Many of them are in other offices in Sydney, Amsterdam, Brazil, and Kuala Lumpur. It's a great place to work, and I'm really honored to be a part of the team here. As I mentioned, this is our first event. We're really hoping that this will gain some momentum and we can start getting more people coming and attending. I think that it'll be a great time for us to kind of get together and share some of our stories, some things that are working for us, and share kind of tips and techniques. So I just want to give a little bit intro about Atlassian for those who might not know what Atlassian is all about. We're a collaboration software company. We've been around for about 10 years. Our main goal is to enable product teams to build and launch great software. So we have a number of products. We have about 10 products, anywhere from an issue tracker, Jira, to Confluence, our enterprise wiki. We have some dev tools. We have all sorts of stuff. We just acquired HipChat a few months ago, which is our internal or our group communication tool. So we have a lot of tools that allow customers and support engineers to communicate. As I mentioned, we're about 10 years old. We're growing at a pretty rapid pace. We just moved into this office, so we've only been here for probably 6 or 7 months. But what's really awesome about this is we actually dedicated a space to have meetups like this. And I think it's great that we were actually able to create a space that can allow for this type of meetup and for us to kind of come together. Few logistical things. So there's pizza here. Please grab as much pizza as you want. We're probably going to have too much, so fill up as much as you can. Beer and drinks are in the fridge right there. If you haven't grabbed one, please grab one. There goes Jammins, right to the beer as fast as you can. And the restrooms are in the back, just behind the food there. So please explore the area. If you have any questions about the office, definitely let a fellow Atlassian know. A little bit about Atlassian support. Actually, a lot of people, even at Atlassian, don't know this. Atlassian actually started as a support organization. So before we were even a product company or a software company, Mike and Scott, our founders, were actually looking to start a support organization. They found that they were providing a higher level of support to some issue trackers in Australia, to customers, and they soon realized that the software that they were supporting sucked, and they wanted to make something better. So that's how Jira and Confluence actually came along. So what's pretty cool about being in support here is that we were actually started as a support organization. A bit about our organization. We have 140 engineers worldwide, and 25 of those awesome employees live and work in San Francisco or the surrounding area. We have a growing team here. And one of the things that we're starting to think about as an organization is revolutionizing the way that we do support. We don't want to just be someone who just kind of bangs out issues in queues. We want to be creating a great high level of customer satisfaction. We want to be innovative in the way that we provide support to customers, and we really want to create a great experience that's also easy for us and low touch for us as an organization. So we're really hoping that as we grow, we can start sharing these ideas and really understanding how we can grow and how everybody in this room can grow as support organizations. Why we wanted to do this meetup, we've been talking about this for probably about 1.5 years now, realizing that there's a ton of people in the Bay Area and globally that work in support, but we couldn't really find a group of people that really wanted to come together as a support engineer level, or people who work with customers on a daily basis, or who get their hands dirty on the technical side. A lot of the meetups and events were kind of more manager level or director level, more strategic. And so This event is kind of the kickoff of what we hope is going to be a great community of people that can come together and share ideas, whether it's in a regular meetup, whether it's over email, whether it's over Twitter, Facebook, that kind of thing. We really want to build a strong community for everybody here so that we have a resource not only in our organizations, but outside of our organizations to understand how we scale, how we work with those angry customers that we get every day, and how we just provide great customer service to each and every one of our customers. So this is the initial meetup. It's quite small, but we hope that over the coming months that this is something that grows up and really becomes a really flourishing community. So like I said, we really are looking to kind of build a community and have something that we can continue getting momentum on. We are open to having this event in different offices in different areas. So if you have someone, or if you're interested in hosting this, or if you know someone who would be interested in hosting our next event, definitely touch base with either myself or John, and we can kind of chat a little bit about where you want to where you'd want to go from there. My contact and John's contact information is all on the meetup group, so feel free to reach out to us. And definitely for the next one, share this with your friends, put it on Twitter, put it on Facebook. We're really hoping to build this community. So I'm pretty excited to announce today's presenters. We actually have two presenters. First is going to be Chris LePetit. Chris is going to talk about, and the title of his presentation is Scaling a Global Support Team to Resolve 1,500 Requests Using Kanban. So Chris actually gave this presentation at Atlassian Summit, which was a couple weeks ago, which is our annual user conference. And it was very, very successful. So I'm excited to have him kind of bring that here and be able to answer questions for us to have a discussion on that. And in addition to that, we're going to have a short presentation by John, who's going to talk about, and I'm going to quote his title as 5 Stupid Customer Tricks. So things that we can be doing to work with customers who potentially might need some love, might need a little bit of help here and there. So, and some encouragement. Yes, that's the best phrase to kind of put that. So I'm really excited to kind of hear both Chris and John speak about their topics. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to get started talking about Kanban and support.
I can do that. So that helps, thanks. All right, I'm going to have to...
All right, you're in, man.
All right, just give me a second to set this up. See if that works as expected. Just like this. Cool. No, I'm not. Just to troll you. Just because you want it explained, I'm not going to. All right, let's see if that button works. All right, there we go. So yeah, today, as Dylan said, I want to talk a little bit about scaling the longest possible title you can fit onto a keynote slide in one go. Basically, I want to go a little bit through the background of who we are. Dylan's already covered a lot of it, so thanks, Dylan. And talk about the experiment we ran, the results of that experiment, and where we're going next with this, and where we think that everyone else should be going next. So a little bit of background. Obviously, we're Atlassian Support. We at the time of me doing this and the experiment and everything like that, we were growing over a period of about 12 months from about 70 full-time staff to about just over 100 full-time staff. We're across 5 locations, as Don said. So we have a follow-the-sun style support center. And we've got now 24/7 availability for critical and enterprise issues. Now this means that we essentially have now 5 different centers that never stop, which means that any kind of process that we want to change gets quite difficult. We're also jumping up to to take on about 1,500 issues a week at this stage, whereas about 12 months ago we were looking at about 1,000 issues a week. So there's a huge amount of growth, and that's coming because of the fact that we provide support with every product we provide, and our sales are increasing. So we need to figure out a way to catch up with that. So that sort of leads into what the problem was, and the problem is quite obvious. It's one of scale. And we're dealing with a situation where our customer base is growing hugely. But the current rate of us answering support tickets is not going to match that scale. I mean, our just internal growth versus our new issue growth in my wonderful little numberless chart here basically indicates that we had a problem that we were going to face pretty soon. And it's not just a problem in terms of scale on itself, because at this point you can quite easily do simple things. You can cut corners. You could maybe say, look, we're not going to give support to these guys. You can make it really cheap and nasty and really make it nice and easy to scale. But my analogy for that is it's kind of like comparing a waiter at a restaurant to the guy at McDonald's who says, would you like fries with that? Would you like fries with that? It scales, but it's not really what we want. We don't want to be that guy. We call ourselves legendary support, and we want to live up to that. So that was a big important thing for us. And to top this all off, any changes that we make, as I said before, had to just fit in seamlessly with our existing processes. So we can't just go in and on a Monday say, cool guys, new system, because we'd need to train everyone up on the new system, which means that we'd need to stop on a Friday afternoon, which we can't do. We're 24/7, and we've got 5 different locations. So it was really quite a challenge for us to introduce anything that would change how this sort of scale was going. On top of this, there was an effect on the individual engineers themselves. As we're taking more and more tickets, we ended up getting more and more siloed in the work that we were doing. We were working as individuals to solve the large number of tickets that we were facing, rather than working together. We were getting quite stressed. I don't know about, there's a few of us support engineers here, but I don't know about you guys, but during a launch time, it was always quite stressful. And we were finding that it was just going from one stressful time to another without that sort of down period. And we're getting more and more interruptions. With the introduction of the 24/7 support for criticals and also enterprise, it meant that there were more phone calls coming in. There were more interruptions from walk-ups. There were more things about how we're going to work this particular feature into a product. There was just more and more general interruptions as the day goes on. So this made it very difficult for us to change what we were doing, do what we wanted to continue doing, and at the same time scale what we're looking at. So we ran an experiment, and a little bit of extra background about this. In support, we have been running a lot of experiments lately. We're really lucky in Atlassian in that we have the freedom to be able to shake things up and change things a little bit, and this has been fantastic. So we decided to run our own experiment. And then part of this was inspired by the fact that at the same time, the GreenHopper team, the development team, were reinventing the Rapid board, or reinventing GreenHopper as a whole through the Rapid board. So they had actually just put the finishing touches on the Kanban Rapid board, or Kanban, I believe is a pronunciation here. So, but I blame Nick for that anyway. But they had just put the finishing touches on it and were delivering it to customers at this time. And this was actually really exciting for us in support because for the first time, we had actually been there from, I guess, from the inception of this new idea. It was probably about 18 months ago, or maybe even less, maybe 14 months ago. Nick was there with sketches, literally sketches, and saying, I want this, and I want this, and I want to be able to do this. And then as the weeks rolled on, it turned from more detailed sketches to actual JavaScript and actual code and actual plugins happening. And then it was out with customers in a beta format. And then finally it was here, it was ready, and it was this whole thing. And that was different for us because normally we just got shown the end result and it was like, here you go, support it, guys. So that was huge. But on top of that, throughout the whole process, we got to ask the questions. Why would you want to do that? What does that feature do? What is the purpose behind that? And through that, the GreenHopper team was actually able to teach us a lot more about Agile than we'd ever known before. We actually understood the thinking behind it. So we decided based on that to look into it a little bit more. We read up on Kanban, we read up on all these different things, and we thought, you know what, this is actually sounding pretty cool. And it fits a lot with our current experiment plans, so we want to roll out a new experiment with it. So we chose a place and a time. We chose one trial team, our KL team. Now, we chose this team because their numbers weren't the top, they weren't the bottom, they were kind of in the middle. They're also a large enough team to support the plan. We figured that these guys were keen enough to try it. At the same time, they weren't going to be skewing the results by being the guys that sit next to the developers. They weren't going to be skewing the results by being the guys that get no interaction with the developers. They were hopefully going to be the control team. We also did it during the Jira 5 and GreenHopper 5.9 launch. Now that sounds kind of crazy. Why would you do an experiment when you're launching a new product? Because obviously you're going to have high queue loads, you're going to have a lot more that's going on. So we actually decided to do this based on the fact that a support process, any support process, has to withstand a launch. If it doesn't withstand a launch time, then there's no point in doing it because next time a launch rolls around, your process is going to fall apart and it will all be wasted. If you can't take on that extra load with this new process, even as an experiment, then you're in a lot of trouble and there's not much point in doing it. So we had our time and our place to run this experiment. So we had to start by looking at what we'd learned from the GreenHopper team in terms of where we go next and what we'd learned from our reading up further to that. So I'm not going to go too much into what Kanban is, as much as Tim wants me to. I would recommend you look this up separately because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of great reading to go through. But I'm going to tell you what we did and how we got into it based on what we had learned from these guides out there. So we wanted to start by visualizing our workflow. And this is huge because we traditionally looked at our workflow kind of like this. We're like, well, there's unassigned issues and then there's everything else. That's it. There's stuff that needs to be done and stuff that's sorted or not. But then when we sat down and thought about it, that's kind of a very high-level view of what was going on. And we thought, well, the individual engineers look at it a little bit differently. They have a third column in there, and that's my stuff. So there's stuff that needs to be done, there's my stuff, and then there's everything else that I don't care about. But in reality, our workflow kind of looked like this. And suddenly we're going, wow, there's a lot more going on there. And it wasn't just that there were a lot of different statuses that it could be in. There was a lot of different ways that you could move through those statuses. So obviously an issue comes in, we want to take it on, and we want to do a little triage and assign it out to somebody, or get someone to look at it and start working on it. From there, they'll send it off to the customer and say, hey, does this solve your problem? Is this what we're looking for? The customer might, at that point, say, no, you idiot, I want to escalate this and talk to somebody better than you. Or the customer might say, rather than the customer saying that, I might actually look at the issue and say, you know what, I have no idea what's going on. I need to speak to a dev. At the same time, the customer can say, you know what, this actually doesn't solve it. Here's some more information for you. Or the customer could say, yes, that does solve it. It's resolved. And then from there, once it's resolved, we go through a little sort of wrap-up process where we clean everything up, make sure all the metadata is in there for us to look up later and to handle later on, and we close it. And that's our definition of done, I guess, in the agile and development sort of sense. We don't believe it's officially done until the customer says it's done, and we've actually done our little metadata cleanup at the end. Then on top of that, we figured, where's everything sitting? So we took our existing Jira instance that we use for support, and we put GreenHopper up on that, which lets us visualize all the data that's there, all the issues. And so we actually had a look at where these issues were sitting at any one point in time, and this was really quite frightening. We were finding that the bulk of our issues were actually waiting for customer at any one point in time. Now, this isn't that scary normally, but waiting for customer basically means that it might be work or it might not be. So we could no longer predict what's going to happen with that nearly 2/3 of our workload. I mean, if we're visualizing it, it kind of looks like that, which is insane. So do we know what's going to happen with those issues? So we went back to our stats guy, and we have a stats guy in Sydney who knows every single number there is to know in Atlassian. If he doesn't, he'll figure it out. And he told us that the magic number for the waiting for customer column is that, what did we find out? 33%, that's right. 1/3 of those will return within 24 hours, and they will be more work that we need to do. So now we knew what we could count upon within that column. We knew a lot more about what was going on. We knew that if there was 10 issues right there, 3 or 4 of those will be back before the end of the day. So now we've actually got something we can rely upon. And we haven't even started doing the experiment yet. We've just actually started looking at what our workflow is and where all that data is. It was fantastic. On top of that, we started looking at the charting that was available to us. So GreenHopper does all these great different charts. This one is the control chart. It's sort of clipped a little bit at the bottom, but what we've got across the bottom is days, basically dates, and the y-axis here is the number of days it took to resolve a particular issue. Now this is going from the very first column of the issue being created to the very last column of it being wrapped up and done. Now what we found is that there are a few patterns that we hadn't sort of visualized before or confirmed before. We could feel that these patterns were happening, and I definitely could as a support engineer. I knew that they were there, but I didn't have anything to prove it. But now we had these charts that showed us, look, hey, there's this triangle sort of shape here, and that's because of our Monday to Friday resolve rate. There's a gap where people are not doing any work on Monday to Friday, which means that our resolve rate has this 2-day gap in it. On top of that, we're also getting gaps around public holidays. That's the New Year's gap, basically. That's January 1st and December 31st. So we're getting a massive gap where no one's doing any work that day. On top of that, we can also see the week-by-week stuff. So Monday to Friday just makes these giant columns there. It's a little bit longer than 5/7 because we have that follow the sun call center, which means that Monday in Sydney is like, what, Sunday afternoon here? So we're getting like 1.5 days a weekend. And then on top of that, we're also getting this last one, which is basically the 7-day timeout line. So we have a little bot that jumps in on all the old cases, the cases that haven't been updated, that are waiting for a response from a customer and have had no sort of feedback from that customer in 7 days. And we say, hey, do you still love us? And if they say nothing in response, then it closes it. And we actually have this line that just goes straight across here where all those issues are getting closed. And so this was great because from here, we're actually able to start a new project and a new experiment almost right away where we're trialing to see what happens if we reduce that timeout period from 7 days to maybe 24 hours, maybe 48 hours. We want to see what that kind of experiment will get us. So that was a great thing. Again, just visualizing the data tells you a lot more about what was going on in our workflow that we hadn't really sort of looked at properly before. So now we wanted to go on the next step, and that was identify the waste that we had. So we actually, as we looked at it, we saw a lot of things that were going on, but we didn't really know where the waste was. So we again looked at what we did for each individual step. So how we used to work was that we would look at an issue in detail. We would basically say, as individual engineers, can I solve this issue, or will someone else be better? Am I the expert in LDAP, or maybe I should hand it over to Dylan because he's a little bit better in that stuff. Or can someone else learn from this? Maybe Michael will actually benefit better because he can learn a lot more from this case if he takes it. And are we going to be able to respond to this in time? Of course, the great SLA question. And then on top of that, we would have to compare it to our personal queue and do this sort of comparison back and forth and determine which one's a higher priority for us to look at, and then eventually take on the next issue. This is quite detailed, and this is something that does need to be done for every single issue. But what was happening is because of our siloed nature, every engineer was doing this. Everyone would do it. This is hugely wasteful. This was insane. This was, one issue could actually be reviewed multiple times. If we looked at it and said, oh, you know what, this is not going to be my forte. I'm not an LDAP guy. I'm really not an LDAP guy. So I'm not going to take that. I'll leave that for someone else. I could look at that for 5 minutes before determining it's an LDAP problem, or maybe even 10 minutes. But if we had just 5 engineers look at one ticket for 10 minutes, that's nearly an hour of time lost. And we're just leaking time at that point. And the big scary number, of course, is if you look at it, 10 minutes a day for maybe 2 to 3 issues each engineer looking at and not actually taking, times 70 support engineers actually actively working, it's like 11 man-hours a day. So we're looking at like 2 support engineers that we've lost at that point, basically, just because of this waste. So next step, remove waste, right? We know what it is, let's get rid of that. So we actually put in what we call a dispatcher. So the dispatcher is not your traditional triage guy. It's not your traditional, let's filter things out and just move things around a bit. It's a pretty full-on role. We actually basically moved all those rules, all those responsibilities, everything that the engineers were previously doing before they work on a ticket, over to the dispatcher. So they triage the new issues. They keep an eye on the queue. They monitor for critical issues. They monitor for escalations. They're the ones that always have their finger on the pulse. They always know what issues are in there, what needs to be looked at, what is already assigned. On top of that, they actually actively assign the issues out to the engineers. So what happens now is each individual engineer only needs to look at their own personal queue. Issues just magically appear in there, and they'll get a tap on the shoulder if it's a critical one. That's basically all they have to do. Now they don't have to compare 2 different queues. They don't have to analyze if this is the right issue for them or not. They just get on and do their work, which is fantastic. We also started running some stand-ups to get this siloed stuff around, moved out and start working a bit more as a team. So this was huge for us because we actually got the stand-ups to be run by the dispatcher. Now the dispatcher has just gone through that queue every 5 minutes for the whole day. They know every single ticket in there right now. They've dispatched all the critical issues out already, so all that's left is non-critical issues, stuff that we've got a day or 24 hours to respond to. They can now bulk assign all these issues out to individual engineers. So if we get 3 people standing up, one of them's good at LDAP, and there's 3 LDAP issues in there, we don't end up splitting 3 LDAP issues across 3 engineers. We have one guy taking on all 3 LDAP issues. He can use those logs to then compare, contrast. You've got 3 separate instances to figure out what the patterns are, what the patterns are not. And you can actually reduce the context switching at that point as well. Set up one test LDAP server, test all these 3 problems at once, rather than setting up one LDAP server, setting up another environment to test GreenHopper, and then tearing it down to set up another environment to test Bamboo integration. We've actually got this great thing here, and it was really an energetic thing. What would actually happen is these guys would all stand up around the dispatcher and get really excited about taking new issues. I've never actually seen people argue to get an LDAP issue before and assign it to them. But this is what would happen. As soon as somebody would call something out, the dispatcher would call an issue out, give us a headline, then everyone would say, you know what, I already have one similar, or that's not what I can do, or maybe I do have room for it. If I don't take on this one, I might get a nastier one later. So it was really exciting, really energetic. And if anyone knew an answer but was incapable of taking that particular issue because they had too many issues themselves, they could just throw out the answer, throw out suggestions, throw out tips, say, come see me if you're having trouble with it. So we're actually getting a real team bonding, team spirit behind it all. On top of that, we started using GreenHopper. And this was hugely exciting because I've been supporting GreenHopper for quite some time now, and I really like it, but I've never really had a good reason to use it until now, and this was a great time. So we ended up using GreenHopper for a few different reasons. It meant there was no downtime in terms of our experiment. Once we got GreenHopper installed, we didn't have to change anything. We could still make new rapid boards, reconfigure them, change how they're working, tweak the different filters we're using, tweak the swim lanes. This basically meant that we could very quickly move from a very sort of old and sort of wait for a weekend and reboot the system kind of upgrade method to a very on-demand sort of instant kind of let's just prototype a few things straight away. On top of that, we moved from an old Wallboard that looked kind of like this to a new one that looks more like this. So we still use the two of them in conjunction. But what we're finding is if we want to have a look at the whole situation, we can actually tell much, much faster what is going on with everybody in the team with this rapid board. So we've got these swim lanes down the side here that actually show us each individual engineer. So we've got, for example, Momo and Daniel here. Our unassigned stuff sits at the top so it can get the highest attention and we can assign it out. We can fold that away when we want to look at the rest. We get a quick summary of how many issues these guys have assigned. Now, going back to that number before of how many issues were actually sitting and waiting for customer, we had 65% of our issues waiting for customer at any one time. That's 2/3 of our work. We're counting that waiting for customer in this number here because that number will outweigh the 33% that are coming back will outweigh the ones that are not when combined with the issues that are actually assigned and waiting for us. Yes, mate.
That's 45 issues with one person?
Yep, that's 45 issues spread across the 4 columns.
How many, can you expand one of those?
This is actually a screenshot, so I don't have, But it does sound like a lot. So, for example, that could be a case of somebody who, sorry?
2/3 are waiting for customer.
Exactly. So if you've got 30 waiting for customer at that point, then only 15 need action. That's still a lot, but if you factor in a few things like maybe he's just taken on a group of, maybe we identified a new bug, which does unfortunately sometimes happen, at which point he could take on 5 or 10 issues that are all the exact same bug and analyze them together. And so whilst these numbers are looking quite extreme in some cases, it's basically an overall number that we can use to quickly determine, I guess, the particular pain that they're feeling. Now, obviously, one case is not going to be equal to another case in terms of the value behind it, but it gives us a very quick way to quickly identify what's going on. This also meant that we could have quick filters going with the rapid board to actually sort of cut it down. If we wanted to see, all right, who's just got long-running cases, or who's got GreenHopper-only cases, or who's got cases that we've tagged with a particular label, we can go through and quickly identify those and look at just those. We're also in the process of trialing work-in-progress limits so that we can actually limit the work that anyone has in a particular column and sort of flag it as it is right here in red when we need to identify this. So basically this is telling us right now we have a lot of issues that are waiting for us and they're in investigation. We need to work on that and move them across to the other columns, move them out to waiting for customer. So that's basically drawing our attention there. If it was below our threshold, then we'd obviously be assigning more in there. But it's a quick way to sort of identify our bottlenecks. So the results, we ran this test for 1 month, and we wanted to see how it went. The results were quite good. Ultimately, we had an increase in response time within the experiment team. So we had 2 teams, experiment team obviously, which was the KL team, and then we compared them to the rest of the global team. And we wanted to compare the stats between the two. We measured response time, which is basically the number of issues responded to within our granted SLA for each different issue. So if it's a critical, that might be 1 hour. If it's just a generic question, it might be 24 hours. But we wanted to measure the response time within those timeframes. And the escalation rate. So the escalation rate is going to tell us how much knowledge we are lacking in terms of customer service and also in terms of product knowledge. How many times we're escalating an issue back to the developers and getting information from them. So why didn't we measure customer satisfaction, which is a big thing, obviously, for everyone in support? Well, the sample size is much, much smaller. If we're now talking about grouping our team into one small team and the global team, the sample sizes are going to be mismatched. It takes up to a month for the customers to get back to us. And on top of that, they may never get back to us. And it's not really suitable for measuring live experiments because it doesn't give you a sort of an on-the-pulse kind of feeling of what's going on. And on top of that, we kind of found that a lot of our other stats, like response time and escalation rate, would feed directly back into an expected customer satisfaction result. So whilst we can go back and retroactively measure it, what we find is if we want to get live data, the best thing to look at is the things like the response time and the escalation rate. So how did it actually go? So this is, don't go too far, cool. This is our trial team versus the non-trial teams. Now, obviously, the non-trial team is making up, I think, about 70%, 60% of our global support team. I don't know off the top of my head. So the trial team, initially, pre-trial, was pretty much level. As soon as the trial started, bam, they shot up in terms of their response time. They were able to get to those issues quicker because A, we were grouping them together, and B, we had one dispatcher looking at everything and just handing them out when necessary. The non-trial team started to suffer immediately. Now, the dip there is not because they suck. They're actually pretty awesome. The dip there is actually because Jira 5.0 came out. And Jira 5.0 had a bunch of new APIs, deprecated a bunch of old APIs, and had a whole bunch of new features that made it very difficult for us to get on top of this new load immediately. As well as that, we also launched GreenHopper 5.9, which had a whole bunch of new features. So we were dealing with 2 new products in the same week, hence the dip that continued throughout the first 3 weeks of the experiment. Now you can see that the trial team did dip as well with the extra load. This was kind of expected. We generally do expect to have a small hit whenever there's a new launch. But we were able to maintain pretty much close to what we're at pre-trial and end out way, way above and ultimately stay on top of the non-trial teams. Our escalation rate was amazing. This was something that we're really, really happy with. So we, in the trial team, we actually managed to halve that escalation rate essentially. In the non-trial teams, we had like this tiny, tiny little increase. But the trial teams had this 46% drop. And this is huge. This was based on having one central point that knew every ticket that was live at the moment, essentially. This dispatcher knew everything that was going on within the queue. On top of that, you had the bulking of issues. It meant that if you wanted to escalate a GreenHopper issue or you wanted to escalate an LDAP issue, you didn't have 3 separate engineers individually looking at 3 separate LDAP cases that were actually the same problem and then individually escalating them. You had one guy looking at 3 cases, bouncing out 3 of them, getting more information from customers, and escalating the 3rd. Yep?
So how do I compare the scales there? Because if I look at February,
That's right.
2 or whatever percent, and both of those are 2%.
So the increase for the non-trial team was, I think, about a 6% increase from the previous month in terms of the number of escalations they went. So this is, sorry, the numbers here are the escalations per issue created. So we did have a larger number of issues created, a number of escalations being created within the trial team originally. And what we found is that that was a combination of a number of things, but ultimately there was that disorganized nature. We had essentially the same escalation coming through 3 times. On the other hand, the team here was, the non-trial teams were sitting pretty stable at just under 2.5%. And we managed to basically bring the trial team down to that number as well, which is huge. We halved the escalation rate pretty much so. Yep.
Do you attribute the initial high number there to the fact that you're learning the new process in addition to?
Oh, sorry. My bad. Yeah. So February was the month that we did the experiment. Sorry. So January was pre-experiment. Sorry, I should have made that clearer.
Oh, so you got immediate results.
Yep. during the month we got results. It was pretty much as soon as we rolled this out, we saw that drop. Yep.
Sorry, just on that then, why is the escalations for the trial team much higher than the non-trial teams in January?
So again, we picked the KL team because they were a much greater example of that siloing. That effective, look, there's 3 LDAP issues in the queue, as I keep saying, and let's have 3 engineers take them. And what we were finding is when stuff was coming back to Sydney for the escalations to the developers, is that it wasn't coming back once, it was coming back multiple times from multiple different people in the same area. Now this is something that we wanted to stop straight away. And there are a number of different things that we've been trying and doing. One of them, of course, is new training that we've done as well. But the biggest thing that we found is basically getting one guy who knows what's going on with a particular part of the product, essentially a subject matter expert, and getting them to take all the issues related to that area. Or if there's a lot of issues related to that area, get 2 guys and get them to focus on that work. That way you can actually just pull everything together, especially when a new product comes out, especially with new bugs. You can actually identify these problems a lot faster. In addition to the hard stats, we've actually got anecdotal results. The guys in KL were feeling a lot more in control. A lot of them were saying that they felt in control of the queue rather than the queue being in control of them. It was a lot less stressful. They felt a lot happier after those Wallboard stand-ups. They felt a lot sort of much more energized and I guess ready to take on the queue in general. And most importantly, there was no impact on the non-trial teams. When I got back to Sydney after helping run this experiment, and told the guys in Sydney that I work with that I got a chance to speak at Summit and here in SF because of this experiment, a talk based on this experiment, a lot of them just turned to me and said, what experiment? They had no idea that we had actually changed a process in another center because it didn't impact them. It was perfect in that way. We didn't have to, I'm sure the guys here in SF had no idea what was going on. We didn't end up with a situation where someone was yelling at the previous GO saying, what are they doing? We didn't end up with a situation where you had to sort of coordinate different kind of functions or anything like that.
So are you saying that because you're working all time zones, you would expect the problem, the issue to roll across time zones if it doesn't handle
Well,
isolation?
not just that, but also
It's more like the overall of the issues. It's like the people in the next time zone come in and they see that there's 70 things that are left unsolved. That's different than coming in and finding that there's 30.
And more importantly, for us, we wanted to make sure that everything that we did before essentially had the same ins and outs. So we would, within each geo, for example, within SF, they take on all the West Coast tickets here. All the East Coast tickets are handled by a different team. We didn't change that kind of process. So all the ins and the outs. They do in the case of critical issues. So if it's issues that require global support, can roll across. But in terms of the way that the ins and the outs of the process happened, it was essentially invisible. All that was happening is outside of the tickets themselves, we were changing the way that we looked at the queue and changing the way that we managed that queue.
And so these measures were the non-critical issues?
It was everything together.
So the reason why you're saying the other centers were not affected is because even though some were rolling to other centers, there was no net increase.
There was no net increase, but more importantly, there wasn't. In previous places, had new sort of processes rolled out, and there generally tends to be that moment on Monday morning after they've or Tuesday morning when they've changed things over in a previous geo, and you get in and you don't understand why things are left behind, or you don't understand why things are done in a different way. Essentially, what we did is we managed to tie up all the loose ends that would be tied up by the existing process, and not have any kind of requirements on the other team to understand. Essentially, we wanted to make it almost invisible to the other teams so that we could fail silently if it failed, and succeed loudly like we do right now if it succeeded.
So that's pretty magic all by itself.
That's right, and that was a huge thing for us because I don't know if you've ever been on the receiving end of another team running an experiment that doesn't work, but it's never pretty. But on top of this, like as I was saying, it was Jira 5.0 and GreenHopper 5.9 that launched. We had nearly a 10% increase of issues for the trial team. This was huge. So the trial team handled 10% more issues nearly than normal. And the results still actually improved. They had better response times. They had lower escalation rates. So this was fantastic for us. This is basically what we wanted to do. We wanted to scale, and we managed to take more issues and handle them better by our general metrics. As well, we also managed to make the support engineers feel a little bit happier. So that was really a huge success for us. We were very happy with that. And the future, where are we taking this? So next up, we've actually got this as a standard process for 3 teams now. The Amsterdam team works closely with the KL team, and actually they have the one dispatcher between the 2 teams, and they just remotely dispatch those issues and contact each other via Skype for the stand-up. We have the SF team is now running the experiment as well. We're yet to see if it is going to be a success or a failure, but I don't know. I think these guys can tell you about it. It's working quite well so far, as far as I can tell. We do want to roll it out globally as a new standard if possible, but again, we're not going to force it. I don't think that we should ever force a standard like this unless it's going to work. So we are being quite, I guess, lenient in the way that we're putting it out there. It's also quite, it's a work in progress as well, so we can always change the way that we're doing it. And we're trialing work in progress limits that as I've mentioned before, just to see how we can make that enhance our focus on those particular columns. So where can you guys start? Well, first of all, as I said before, it's basically your 3 steps. You want to visualize. If you're using Jira, then you can install GreenHopper. If you're not, import everything into Jira, or find. I'm sure there's similar options for what you're looking at. Essentially, what you want to do is you want to find a way to create a Kanban style board that will let you visualize all your work across the various different statuses that they can be in. You want to identify the waste. You want to find the biggest time vampires that are sitting there, things that are sucking up a lot of time that are being done by multiple people. You want to find overlaps. You want to find areas where you're working as individuals rather than as a team. And this is a huge, huge thing. The power of the team really comes into play once you can actually get everyone coordinated like we did. And you want to remove waste. So this is really going to be individual to the way that you work. But for us, using a dispatcher was a godsend. It was huge. We had previously used triaging systems, but that was a lot less heavy-handed than what we do right now. It was more of a cleaning up the issues before someone else goes and looks at them. This was let's get out there and actually assign them to the engineers and do all that first part of it. Bulk assign issues by type wherever possible. It sounds obvious, but we forget it so much in support because we treat each customer individually. They are individual customers, but the issues can still be the same. Look at the reality of the work that you're doing. We kind of got a little bit tunnel visioned in the work that we were doing and just kept doing it day in, day out. It took us a while to sort of step back and really analyze what we were doing and relearn the work that you do. So once you've had a look at the reality of it, relearn what you're doing because it's going to be quite different to what you started off doing, and it's also going to be quite different in terms of what you should be doing now that the job has evolved. So yeah, in summary, we managed to scale our capacity. We managed to improve the quality of what we were doing, and there was no negative impact to the other teams. So we thought this was a huge success, and we just wanted to tell you about it. That's all I got. If you want to contact me, contact details are here. Otherwise, I think we will be handing it over to John. Is that right? Cool. Few minutes break? Okay, we'll have a few minutes to have a breather. If you guys want to, I can do a Q&A if you guys want, if you guys have any questions about that.
How big were the teams in KL? So using one dispatcher between KL and Amsterdam, so how many underneath that dispatcher?
At the time that we rolled it out, it was 2 to 3 guys in Amsterdam because they have a 50-50 engineer between Jira and Confluence. And then the KL team is 8 people, I think it is. So essentially we went from a team of 10 to a team of 9 plus a dispatcher. Now the dispatcher can also pick up all the low-hanging fruit, the really easy cases, and pull those out so that we just have the meaty stuff left for the support engineers.
Hold on, that's a two-part question.
Oh, here we go, here we go.
Exactly. So do you think it's actually logical to have it for, say, a 4-person? To have this dispatcher who then can pick up your low-hanging fruit?
I think it is very difficult to have a smaller team that takes on the queue like that. I'll get to you in a second, Ivan.
I want to add on.
Okay, sure.
I wanted to say that the low-hanging fruit person, the dispatcher, typically is kind of like as a C role, right? They're the person who's going to work with you when things are more complicated. Because you can see how the time to say, I'm knock out these issues that are low-hanging, it's whatever. But they can sit down with you and say, hey, your issue with LDAP off the regular queue, but they can work with you the more complicated stuff.
That's right. We did our best to make sure that it was the more senior engineers that were taking on the dispatcher role. They could analyze and understand an issue faster, obviously, through their experience and through their knowledge. But also that had the advantage of, it meant that you had one person on the team who had a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience that was never tied down in heavy, heavy cases. They were always there with the lightest cases, and they were always ready and available to speak to people. But yeah, so going back to the how do we make it scale with a smaller team, it is quite a challenge, and it's something we're looking at for the Sydney team, because currently in Sydney there's 2 guys. So taking one off the queue for a dispatcher doesn't really make a lot of sense. But what we do want to do is we want to make sure that we can take the lessons that we learned from the rest of the experiment and apply that to the Sydney team. So when I get back to Sydney, one of the things that I'm going to be looking at is where all those issues are sitting. Sydney's a very different world to the rest of the teams because we have our developers there. We have a much larger degree of focus on escalations than the other centres do, which means that we have a slightly different workload and a slightly, sometimes more complicated, but also sometimes a lot lighter in terms of maybe issue volume workload. So we need to make sure that we are balancing it out in the right way. And this is part of what I said before. We're not just going to force it onto everybody, because that doesn't make sense. Quite often, especially with individual geos, you need to make sure that you're looking at what makes sense for that team.
Have you guys looked into the possibility of making a dispatcher role a rotating role?
Yep. So currently in the KL team, they rotate it between the 2 senior support or 2 most senior support engineers they've got there. That helps basically mean that you've got one person who, whenever they do pick up those cases that turn into hairy things, they get a week or 2 off to work on those and focus on that and working on the IEQ, and then come back to that dispatcher role once they've cleaned everything up again.
Is the dispatcher role necessarily meant to be product specific or product team specific, or could it be somebody who's an SSE who's got kind of a broad knowledge base across multiple products?
I would recommend that you have someone who is a subject matter expert for that product. The reason being, if it takes more than a few minutes to analyze a case and determine what needs to be done next, then you're wasting a lot of time there. So we chose Janet in particular for the duration of the experiment. She knows a lot about Jira, a lot about GreenHopper. That means that whenever she comes across a case, she's either seen it before, she's seen something similar before, or kind of knows where it's heading. You get that kind of gut feeling about cases pretty early on when you first see them, and you know what needs to be grabbed next. If you have someone who has a broad knowledge, they tend to know where to find the information, not necessarily what the information is directly. Kind of like, I know I read this on Wikipedia under the article for that particular subject. I can just find that any time. You don't want to be doing that. You want to have someone who knows straight off the bat. It does help. It does make a lot of difference because quite often we store information in other people or on websites somewhere or in docs. We know not necessarily the information itself, but where it is. And if you're going to someone else for every case you want to triage or dispatch out, it takes a lot of extra time. Yeah, so we've got multiple different ways you can submit a ticket. You can actually call up, and we'll create a ticket for you. You can submit a ticket through email or through the product directly, or you can log on to our website and create a ticket there. It's just a Jira instance.
Okay, so with the queue and the dispatcher, like we've tried, like when we're in a hairy situation and we're just swamped, we do triage, but it's not ideal. And so with the dispatcher, was it a challenge for the dispatcher to understand each member? Like you said, it was 10 people, then it turned into 9 people plus 1 dispatcher.
Yeah.
The dispatcher, is it a challenge because the dispatcher has to understand each of the 9 support engineers' strengths because you're divvying up?
That's right, yeah. So yes, that was a challenge. Part of what made it a little bit easier is that Janet I think she's probably been there like 3rd longest. So she has either been helping train the existing engineers or knows their strengths and weaknesses already. With a new team, with a team of people who don't know each other very well, that can be very difficult. What I would probably recommend doing is something that the KL team does in conjunction is they have rotating subject matter experts. So they have essentially like a training module that they complete once a month, I believe it is, so that they can learn more about a particular topic. Now, you combine that with the dispatching of issues. You know that this guy, I don't know much about him, but I know that he is the GreenHopper expert for this month. So you can give him all the GreenHopper tickets, and he'll be able to sort them out. And He'll also know who the last GreenHopper expert was to go to when they get too hairy. But more importantly, it'll be their focus. They'll get the learning through the training modules, and also they'll have the practical experience of the actual cases. So I would combine it with a system where you're doing active ongoing training, basically, or have designated subject matter experts so that you don't have to, I guess, know everyone, but you've got a reference of who to go to.
Okay, is a long-term goal to have the specialist role as, not just in software, but in any industry, having general versus specific? There are always pros and cons. Like, obviously someone who can deal with issues in any realm is useful, but they can't go dig deeper. So
ideally what we do right here is we present ourselves to a customer as individual experts in a particular topic, when in reality we know a lot of broad topics, and we know the right person to go to. So I'm not terribly good with LDAP, but it doesn't stop me from taking on any of the LDAP-related cases. And I will tell people that I am an expert. But I can, behind the scenes, go to the right person if necessary, or reassign that case to the right person if necessary. So I don't think that we should specialize too much, because what that means is you end up getting bored, you end up getting too siloed. I think the idea of a rotating subject matter expert is probably my favorite one that I've seen in the past few years, in that you get to learn something new every month, quarter, 6 months, whatever it is that you choose for that rotation. But you become an expert in essentially everything. By the time you come back to the first thing that you're an expert in, it's all new and changed and wonderful for you to learn again.
Can you comment on?
That's all right.
Can you comment on what's the rotation, or what's the attrition? How fast people cycle through in tech support?
I don't know. I know that it does change for us based on location and also skill set.
What do you think it is compared to others?
I think support in general has a much higher attrition rate than other places. But I think this is a twofold problem. As I've said to you earlier tonight, I think there is a problem in that support globally is underappreciated. But then there's also the problem a lot of people don't, they get into a support job because it's a job, or because they think that it's a stepping stone to a dev role, or a stepping stone to the management role that they want. So I think it's a twofold problem in that people are misunderstanding what support is from a high level and also from the entry level. So I think, yes, there is a much higher attrition level in support generally, but I don't think that's necessarily because of the role itself, but more so because of the stuff coming in and being pushed into it and coming out of it, basically.
So the happiness factor, is that bringing down the attrition rate, or you still have expectations that it's still a one-year job or a two-year job?
I don't really know, actually. We should probably investigate that. That's a really cool idea. We should probably.
There's some companies, I know Purpose, for example, they've got multiple employees that have been there for 10 years plus. So it really depends on the organization, and there's other organizations that gear their support towards, high attrition and moving them along to other roles or and stuff like that. So it really depends on the company. And for us, even in the locations wise, it's really, really quite different. We have some places where it's quite long and other places where it's very.
I think also there's a joy in customer service that a lot of people don't get because they're not quite doing it right. And it's really quite difficult to get to that moment in a case where you solve a problem for a customer and you solve it in the right way so that they're really appreciative. And that really makes it a wonderful, really lovely job to work in. And we've had this experience with, we run a program called DOS. It's Developer on Support. We actually steal one of the developers from the development team, stick them down in the support pit, and make them do our job for us, which is fantastic. It basically means that they feel our pain on a daily basis. They understand what our role is, and they can share their knowledge, their wonderful, juicy dev brains with us. But a lot of them leave that, and they're like, you know what? It's actually really quite cool. A lot of them really like that feedback that they get from a customer when they solve a really tricky problem. A lot of them really understand at that point. They you see them wheeling their Mac Pro across to, the Sydney office from the Kent Street office, going, oh, I'm on support, 2 weeks, I'll be out of here 2 weeks. And then by the time it's ready for them to leave, a lot of them are actually like, you know what, I'm probably going to miss this a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's very good for seeding software development ideas. So I think it's really valuable regardless of how they come into it.
But I'll
Because everyone's thought of the question. So this is personal experience. I've been industry veteran 12 years, and as far as support goes, and I would say when I first started in support, I believe the industry average for a support engineer was 18 months. And in some places it was lower. AT&T has a way low one. I've friended AT&T and they rotate 9 months. Sucks. They're constantly hiring, constantly firing, constantly turnover. I don't know. They have excellent customer service. What are you talking about? That being said, Atlassian is probably one of the, I'm biased, I work here.
Disclaimer.
It's one of the finest support organizations I've ever worked at. And the retention, it's really high. Let's just say it's well above 18. I've been here for 4 years. I came in as the lowest possible engineer, like a triage engineer. That role doesn't exist anymore. But and now I'm a senior engineer. And to answer your question, I do believe that work environment and engineer happiness really does make retention, make the rotating door effect just felt people I'm excited to come to work in that. Yeah, it's a fun place to work. And maybe we'll take a tour afterwards, but they built me a goddamn house. They built a cardboard house around my desk.
And you think he's joking, but it's like
Actually,
actually.
for 3 months, and they pranked me. But I really do feel like job satisfaction is huge. Like a little bit of respect, a little bit of let's listen to your opinion, and not just lip service, but actually listen to your opinion. That goes a really long way as far as making engineers want to work at it is a thankless position, regardless of where you go. I think certainly we do get a lot of praise here as far as Atlassian goes, but boy, sometimes you just get yelled at by the customer, and that's part of the job.
But that's why we provide free beers. So.
Yeah, that's what I said. Not really, but it is a thankless job, and a little bit of recognition does go along.
I think also, especially in technology, 18 months is a long time. And I know that in the last 18 months in just the Jira family, we've reinvented GreenHopper twice, basically. We've built 2 new GreenHoppers. And we've also done some major modifications to the old one. Jira itself, 18 months ago, was a whole different beast. We didn't have an installer. We didn't have proper LDAP management. We didn't have any of these kind of features. 18 months is a massive time. So we've actually, in this 18-month period, learned amazing new skills. At the same time, we're still having to exercise the old ones occasionally until they get really rusty and we end of life products. But we learn just basically new technologies all the time, whether it's new technologies someone else has brought to us, that's a global standard, or stuff that we've built ourselves. That's fascinating. I think that's a great thing to look at. And even you look at the Apple release cycle. If you were in support at Apple and you were getting bored, there must be something wrong with you. Because in 18 months, how many products do they release? It's crazy, right? And then how many of them support brand new technologies that have never been heard of before, or have been heard of and just got a fancy name by Apple? But the brand new technologies are always happening, and 18 months is a lifetime. So if you haven't found something new to love in 18 months, then probably have a look back and see what's actually been released in that time and see what they're... So it's an iPad and iPhone, probably 2 to 3 Mac refreshes. Well, actually, at this rate, it's also a new CEO. So.
Yeah, and if you're in the opposite of that, it can definitely be frustrating if you're supporting a product or even desktops or something like that just don't change. Yeah.
I would hate to still be supporting Jira 3.13. I would hate to still be supporting Jira 3.13 right now.
There's this enterprise app, and that's what you sit there and you support, and there's nobody that works on it anymore. You just log the same ticket over and over and over. Go, great,
Yep.
sorry, someday.
Yep. That's right.
I want to say this is the problem with here too, right? Like, it's the support role. I think the problem with support role overall is that it's the stigma around it, right? The support role here, they force you to do more than just the queue.
Yeah.
It's just like the day-to-day work, right? They force you to do more than that. They force you to try to be proactive. They force you to think further out. They force you to think, what can we do to lessen the bullshit we deal with day-to-day? Right? So it's not just like, oh, you did the work and you go home. It's like, what can we proactively do to think forward? I think that's like a different mindset than just like doing the work.
I wouldn't say they force you. I would say,
Well,
you have the ability to be
they have great outlets. Yeah, great outlets for you to understand.
No, but like the difference here is that my old organization, I could have an idea. Well, great. I don't have a VP in front of my name, so
Yeah.
Yeah, but here they foster it. No matter how low you are, how high you are, your level is relevant. It's if you have an idea, you push it.
right. Chris doesn't have a VP in front of his name.
Yeah.
So that's the point.
I have CLP, but yeah. No, I mean, that's exactly right. I live in Sydney. I don't live in SF. I'm here because of some ideas that we had. Not just me either, just ideas that everyone got excited about. And we tried them, and it worked. And now we can talk about it. We can train other people on it. We can build on it more. And all of a sudden, I'm here doing talks in San Francisco, which is crazy. But it really means that it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you can come up with a valid idea and have the passion to run with it. Then I think you should be given the freedom within scope to be able to do that. And I think that Atlassian's very good at being able to foster ideas and sort of get people that chance to do that. There's always room for more, but everyone wants more. So.
Sorry to
Yeah.
another question, but I'm just curious because if you're in your model, because this like queue manager basically you get set up as a static person more or less and still manageable. Like I wonder how that affected the communication, between like in the process of escalating and communicating with dev. Like the person who like escalated an issue if they had kind of more GreenHopper policy, since they had like multiple tickets with the same more or less an issue. That's sort of consolidated the communication with developers and kind of broke down that barrier because I think it exists across.
I know there's a lot of problems that can be had with communication, not just global communication. We have every day there's a struggle with that in some way, but there's also in smaller teams within that team. But we've adopted the stand-up that the rest of Atlassian does. It was actually quite funny because we would have the Jira developers come and do support in Sydney, and they would start their rotation, and we'd invite them to our stand-up, and they would go, "This isn't a stand-up. This is not a stand-up," because they were thinking of an agile stand-up. And at that point, we were doing the whole, we're agile, we do stand-ups. But in reality, our stand-up was a sort of, I guess, an all-points bulletin for everything that was important for that day. And it was really good. It was a chance that I got to find out if the products that I wasn't supporting were struggling. And if they were struggling in ways that I've heard of before with our products, so that we could share that knowledge a little bit more, or at least be understanding of the fact that, Michael's probably going to be busy today, I'll leave him be. But we also do product stand-ups. So once we do the big one, we break and we get into the just... That's not with the dev team directly, but it's the DOS is involved in Sydney. And we also have a meeting between SF and the developer in Sydney. Is it bi-weekly or weekly? Well, that's a little bit different now that we've moved Andreas over to Amsterdam. Yeah. So we're also trialing another experiment where we've sent the DOS overseas. So so we've taken him out of Sydney and put him in Amsterdam. Basically because we all like to party, and Amsterdam's a good place for that. So, but it means that we're actually getting that communication going, because Andreas, even though he's all the way across the other side of the planet, he knows everybody in Sydney. And he can funnel that communication he's getting from everybody in Amsterdam and the KL team, because they work closely together, and bring that all up. But we do our best to mention these kind of things during stand-up, essentially. But again, we're not perfect. There's always more ways to do it.
Last question.
Yep.
Could you possibly automate the dispatcher role?
So I think you possibly could, but I think you would be taking a lot of the benefit away from the dispatcher role. We would need much better metadata in the issues before we actually got to that automation stage. Simply because of there's customer speak, and then there's technical speak. My user management isn't working is actually the same as my LDAP isn't working, and is the same as my Active Directory isn't working. They're all the same core issue, but there's no way that we could sort of sanely group them together in an automated scripted way just yet, unless maybe we got some devs onto some human language interpretation. Maybe we get Siri to do it or something like that. But once you get to that kind of level, I think that definitely it would be. But we would need a much greater understanding, not just of what is being said, but also of the technical problems behind them as well.
So I have one question for you. I haven't called in your tech support.
Yeah. No, that's final one. Yeah. No.
What does the call sequence look like when you come through your call stack? Are you directed to a pod?
Oh yeah, I think you get off the top of my head I don't know, but you get I think 3 options.